Good evening, and you're listening to another episode of the Mouthmanpodcast. You're listening to us on the Mouthman Radio, and can listen to us on our YouTube channel. Be sure to tune in. I'm Darrell Rourke, and I'm the Mothman, and with me is...
Hi, I'm Amanda, the medium. And if you are interested in having us come out and investigate anything paranormal going on in your house, then just shoot us an email over at all one word, Mouthmanpodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave us a comment, let us know if you like the show, and leave us any questions or any suggestions for show ideas you have.
Thank you, and I just want to wish everybody a happy holiday season, and we're looking forward to putting out some podcasts here in December that hopefully you'll like. This has been quite an active week for us this week. We've talked to some people, and we've got some really good shows lined up. I've got a really good iPhone paranormal picture that we'll be posting on our website there on YouTube.
That was a crazy picture. I'm so glad you got that.
But anyway, we'll be posting that soon, and we'll dedicate a whole podcast to that picture. We're doing a little bit more research and things at this time on that one. Amanda, you've talked to some people too, and they're showing some interest in us coming out to their houses. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm meeting with a family. I don't want to say too much because I don't know if they're which way it's going to go. But we're going to meet with them on Sunday, and their little boy is kind of the focus because he is seeing someone in his room. He has given in, he knows the name. Let's call it Steve for now. But he says, I see Steve, and his mom has said, well, what does Steve look like? And he says, Steve is little like me, and he's a 2 or 3 year old kid. So I'm going to be interviewing the kid to find out a little bit, how do you interview a 2-year-old? We're going to find out. And I'll be taping that, so
and
hopefully
it'll be fun
we'll hear
too.
it.
And if you've been listening to our other podcast, you'll know that we've been talking some about Dr. Jim Tucker, who does research into before life and after life type investigations with little children, and his whole theory is that most children remember things when they're around anywhere from 3 to 6 years old. And so we're hoping this is one of the instances where the child has either been able to recognize a spirit or a paranormal entity within his realm, or that, we're just, like I said, we're going to be investigating it. So we're looking forward to that one. But, Amanda, we were talking this past week, and my daughter had come in from Florida. And during the conversation, she asked you a question, and one of the questions was, tell us a little bit about your background and your education. And I thought that was very interesting, and I'd just like to go back a little bit and have you to let our listeners hear a little bit about the whole entity when you guys started with. We were talking about your religious beliefs and some of the things that you believe in your education. So, I want you to expand a little bit.
I can talk about that. So, I think it really surrounds my master's degree. There was some really, I am who I am today because of the studies I went through for my master's degree. And I took a class one summer that was esoteric religions. And I came into the class as a very devout, I was a very devout Catholic Christian with an evangelical background. And I let the class know. It was a seminar class, so it was constant discussion. And so we would talk about, this esoteric religion, like Gnosticism, for example. And I kept saying, well, I'm a devout Christian, and I don't understand why anyone would believe this kind of thing. And that was kind of how it went almost every week with the class. And, people would challenge me and we would interact, but I just kept coming at it as, well, I'm a devout Christian. Well, the more I studied this stuff, I started to realize that Christianity itself has a background from Egyptian religions, and that what we understand now as the modern religions, they really go back very, very far into history. So I was studying specifically a lady named Madame Blavatsky. Some people will be familiar with her. She's
Can you spell that?
Blavatsky.
I'm joking with you. Go ahead.
She was an interesting character. She was a Russian, kind of like a Russian noble in the mid 1800s, and her father wanted to marry her off to a guy, and she did not like that idea. And she did some things that were very unusual for a woman at her time. She totally ran away from home, which that's unusual. And then she began to travel by herself first. And she traveled all throughout Tibet, Egypt, all throughout India. She was the first Westerner to convert to Buddhism. And eventually she came back. She was constantly searching for what she called the Prisca Theologica. It's weird. Prisca Theologica, which means the original religion. So she was looking for, like, what is the very first religion humans were believing in? And she believed she had found it in Egypt. So she comes back to the West and she starts holding these seminars and salons and teaching, and she starts a semi-religious, semi-philosophical society called the Theosophical Society. So she's very interesting. And I began to study her and her influence on Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland. And so I was kind of, my thesis ended up being about how Lewis Carroll used Egyptian religion to formulate Alice in Wonderland.
Well, wait a second. Now, my interpretation of Alice in Wonderland through, I guess, I've been a criminal investigator. My first indications were that was based off of an LSD trip. Is there
a lot of people think that. I dug into two things about him. One, that he was on mushrooms or other drugs, and two, that he was a pedophile. Well, the history shows that neither of those were true. And I dug pretty deep. I did the research, and that was one of the things I had to defend when I did my thesis defense. They said, well, was he really a pedophile? And, and they challenged me, and I had to present my evidence. So I'm pretty positive neither of those are true, and that he was a very strange guy, no doubt. He probably today would be considered OCD because he wore gloves and wouldn't touch people's hands. He wouldn't touch, doorknobs and things like that. He would wear gloves inside when you weren't supposed to wear gloves. And so people thought he was very strange. But he was a mathematician. He was a member of the clergy, and he was also a member of the Paranormal Society in England at the time. He was really into the paranormal. Fascinating individual. So all of these kind of things eventually led me to start questioning, okay, well, where am I going with religion, and where am I going with all these other things? But I don't know. Does that kind of answer your question, or?
Yeah, I mean, here again, I'm working off of just rumors and the internet. And everything on the internet is true, right?
Oh, of course, yeah. Yes.
So,
trust the internet.
You kind of answered my question there, but I didn't mean to get you off track.
No.
So, how did you finally end up believing in the paranormal coming from such a strict religious background?
Oh, wow. Let's see. So, so I was raised in a very strict religious background, evangelical Christian, and went to Christian schools my whole life, was homeschooled a good part of my life, went to seminary. My undergrad is a theology degree from seminary. We'll just call it a Baptist seminary. I don't want to go into which one it is. But then I explained my my master's thesis, which kind of took me to the point of saying, well, if we can trace religion back to Egyptology, then Christianity is not exactly Christianity. And I still believe that to this day, which doesn't mean that I don't believe in God. But I do believe that most of Christianity can be traced back to Egyptian religion. And even some Babylonian. A lot of that is in there as well. And, and people say, well, how can you say that kind of thing? I've done the research. I can present research. I can present the evidence. I still have my notes. And so it made me really question, like, well, then maybe I'm not Christian, because if, it's kind of like, well, I kind of had to throw the idea out. Christianity has such a, how do I explain it? It presents itself as the only way. And when you look at it and realize, it comes from, 15 other ways and it's kind of melted into one way, then you kind of have to say, well, then that's not quite right. So I became an atheist at that point. And I was just like, well, then God must not exist at all. So from there, I went through a couple of years as an atheist, and just I would say in my heart, in my mind, I was very anti-Christian at that point. Go ahead,
Amanda. I'm going to stop you here on this podcast.
Okay.
We're getting close to the end, and I'm very interested to find out how you finally found your way back, and I'm hoping you listeners out there are just as interested as I am. So we're going to continue this on our next podcast. So be sure to turn your radios and your computers to YouTube and listen to us, or your radio and listen to us at Mothman Podcast Radio. I think you're going to find it very interesting. So for tonight, again, happy holidays, and we will talk to you on the iPod Mothman Podcast in the near future. Thank you.